Okay, thank you. I'd like to call this session of the Board of Revision to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation and Treaty 3 territory. With me today are Linda McFadden and Michelle Duncan. My name is Harvey Diamond, and I'll be chairing this hearing. The City Assessment Department is represented by Roddy Patanella, and our administrator is Phoebe Graywood. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested has been described in the application we'll be hearing, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered as evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions based on the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order to be mailed to the parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or to classification, or to the Court of King's Bench the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation. And should a party wish to appeal, information to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following their swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have. Then the applicant's testimony followed by any questions. Each side will be given an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. Once all the evidence upon the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket. Today, the session will close after all applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decision. You'll receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public records are live stream recorded and will form part of a public record. And today we have one item on the docket, being number 1 now. I may agree with you can please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony at this time.
Mr. Pontanilla, please state your full name.
Rodrigo Pontanilla.
Do you affirm the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Horsbrook, can you state your full name?
Carson Horsbrook.
Do you affirm the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the matter that we're hearing today is the matter pertaining to 844 McLeod Avenue. And Mr. Patanella, when you're ready, you can proceed with your evidence.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just give me 1 second to get my files here. Okay, and so I'm ready to go. So up next, we have file number 24-464. The roll number is 0400 275 7500. The address is 844 McLeod Avenue. The 2025 assessment has gone out at $2,804,000. So we are currently speaking about a strip mall. It is a 1 building, 10 premise subject. Actual year built and effective year built are in 1987. We have a land area of 40,551 square feet and a leasable area of 13,688 square feet. On page 2, I have included a pad eye view image of the subject property so we can see its orientation in the neighborhood. On page 3, I have included an overhead view of the subject property. On page 4, I have a north-facing view and a west-facing view of the subject property. And on page 5, I have the Google Street View images from the 2024 map overlay of the subject property. We have received requests for income information, so we're okay there for the 2021 and 2022 information year. We do have some sales on the subject property. We have one sale from December 5th, 2017 for a sworn value and a sale price of $3 million. On September 30th, 2003, we have a sworn value and sale price for 1.2 million. And that same year, we also have a $1 sale on the subject property. We do have some leases that are being shown. These are all the actual leases for the subject property. So you can take the time to look at every tenant there and the lease information that the rents that they're paying. Following that, I have included some market data rent comparables. These comparables all have a lease from 2014 or newer. We have an effective year up to 1999. We have some C2 and C4 market data points. They're all strip malls and they're all from the market region 2. And we do have the sizes ranging from, it looks to be 956 feet on the lower end, up to 2,500 square feet at the higher end. And then we do have rents ranging from $14.23 at the lower end, or $14 even at the lower end, up to $24 at the higher end. As previously mentioned, there are 10 premises associated with the income stream. So we do have 10 with areas ranging from 900 square feet to 896 square feet at the lower end, up to 2,538 square feet at the higher end. These are all model rents that are being applied to the subject property, and they do range from, it looks to be $10.37 at the lower end for the highest area, up to $15.29 for the smallest area. From there, it brings us to a total potential rent of $193,494. The total area is 13,688 square feet. That brings us to a blended rate of $14.14 per square foot. From there, we do have a model 4% vacancy, a model 3% expense, and a $9 shortfall, which brings us to a net operating income of $175,253. And then we've capitalized that by 6.25% to bring us to our assessed value of $2,804,000. On page 9, I've included a summary of the information that I had provided above. On page 10, I do have City of Winnipeg's cap rate information. And we'll note that the City of Winnipeg does provide a strip mall row under retail for our cap rate 20th and 80th percentiles, which are 5.6 to 6.75, with the subject falling at 6.25. And then we have our outside sources of 6 to 7% for Colliers, 6 to 7% for CBRE, and 6.5 to 7.5% for Cushman and Wakefield. Following that, on page 11, I do have some Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And then on page 12, and taking us to the end of the brief, is the subject property's income and expense statement. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Horsborough, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions for the assessor. Just one moment here. Okay, Mr. Prontanilla, just looking at page 6 of your disclosure, I see you note the subject sale history, December 5th, 2017, consideration sworn value sale price, $3 million.
Yep.
Are you aware if when that property was sold, would that sale have nullified and voided all existing leases in the property?
I'm not aware of that.
Normally, when a commercial property sells, would that nullify all the existing leases.
Mr. Hertzborough, how would an assessor know that? That's a legal question.
Okay, well, generally, it does not nullify the lease, and you purchase a property with the leases in effect. So my question for the assessor is, was the property purchased, was the sale price indicate the leased fee interest?
I'm unaware of the details. I just have the basic sales information that it was relevant and included for analysis.
Were you aware of a long-term lease in the property at the time of the sale?
I mean, it looks like they're showing in the subject property leases. We do have some older leases, some 30-year above leases.
You would agree that most of the property leases appear to be from the 80s or the 90s?
They appear to be, yep.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Landon, do you have any questions?
Just in regards to the cap rate,
Yep.
so the range is 5.60 to 6.75. Why would the model select 6.25? Why not 5.6? Why not 6.75?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a lot of different factors that go into the model's cap rate. Neighborhood would be the sales that have been taken around in the neighborhood. Those are all factors. We do also have the effective age to consider. So the subject property does have an effective age of 1987. So it's a newer effective age. It's a newer building that we're speaking of, as opposed to an older building that would command a higher cap rate based on the risk associated with the property. So this would appear to be from that perspective. And then also, if you look, the total area for the subject property is 13,688 square feet. So typically there is an economy of scale that goes on, where for a newer building, if it has a smaller area, there could be a lower cap rate that the model is generating, just because there has to be a balance of area. You can't have a low cap rate on a building that's over 10,000 square feet. It might skew the value a little bit more than you want it to. So without having the raw data in front of me, that would be the best I could give you for an explanation as to why the model would have chosen that cap rate of 6.25%.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, any questions?
Mr. Pontanilla, did you take a look at the actual expenses that were incurred by the owner, and did you take that into consideration at all?
I did. I looked at some of the information that Mr. Horsborough had provided in his brief. In my analysis, it was difficult for me to find anything that would be, let's say, considered outside the normal expenditure of a property of that size. I couldn't see anything myself. I know that it's not included for evidence, so you can put weight on it for what it's worth, but I took a look at the last several years worth of income and expense analysis mailers, just to have a better idea of the expenses for the subject property. So for my own analysis, I couldn't see anything that would necessarily justify a change in the expense rate. That expense rate that we have on the income stream, that's for a subject property's lifetime, right? So
Sure.
the 3%, it's for expenses that are incurred, but that's 3% every cycle. It factors out into the lifespan of a building as a whole.
So that's a model 3%.
It is a model
That's
3%.
a model generated.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
It's
you.
a model 3%. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Pontanilla, I guess my only question is, there's actual leases here that seem to be reasonable. Is there any reason why the model didn't just choose the leases in place?
I mean, the model is an approximation, right? So we're talking about mass appraisal. It doesn't necessarily ever go exactly to what actual leases are in a building, as there could be factors as to when they're signed, when they're not. So as Mr. Horsborough had pointed out, they are older leases. They're all written. They all were 30-year. I shouldn't say all, but quite a few of them are from the 30-year above range. And so the model, on top of the actuals that are provided, it also takes other data points into consideration, including more relevant lease information and whatnot. So those are all factors that go into calculating that modeled rental rate.
Okay, I think that's my only question. Thank you very much. Mr. Horsborough, you
Thank
can
you.
give your evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Property we're discussing today is 844 McLeod Avenue, file number 24-464. with an assessed value of $2,804,000. If the board will follow me to page 3 of my disclosure, MNP has determined that the market value of the subject property is $2,097,000. On page 4 of my disclosure, I've included the assessment information of the property. And on page 5, I have provided MNP's valuation of the property. We have analyzed the property's expense statement and have included it in the disclosure. We have determined that the expense allowance applied by the city of 3% is not reflective of the property's actual financial performance. We have determined that the property is experiencing expenses that amount to 14.87% of the potential income. As well, the capitalization rate applied for the property by the assessment department would be appropriate for a higher end strip mall that has a large anchor tenant, such as a Shoppers Drug Mart or a Staples, Walmart, what have you. The subject property is in East Kildonan, mid-market strip mall, and they don't have a national anchor tenant. And I'll speak to that further, but that's why we've analyzed third-party reports, and we've determined for this type of property, the capitalization rate ought to be 7.25%. Moving on to page 6 of my disclosure, we've provided the assessment map and aerial overview of the property. On page 7, we have some exterior photographs of the property. And on page 8, I'll begin speaking about the valuation of the property. So the city of Winnipeg has applied a below market cap rate for the property. Leading commercial real estate firms, third-party commercial real estate firms have determined that capitalization rates for non-anchored strip plazas range from 6.5% to 7.5%. So again, the capitalization rate applied by the assessment and taxation department would be appropriate for your larger regional strip malls that have large anchor tenants. The subject property is a smaller neighborhood strip mall, and so the 6.25% applied by the city isn't reflective of the market for the property. I have included a definition of an anchor tenant. And so the anchor tenant is usually a large tenant that drives traffic to the strip mall. The subject property has mid-market focused tenants, including cannabis store, flooring shop, chiropractor, dance studio. These aren't the kind of tenants that are going to be driving in business for the retail plaza. So again, we have a non-anchored strip mall. And so if you have a non-anchored strip mall, the city obviously doesn't look at that in terms of their analysis of cap rates for strip malls, but third parties do look at that, and they have determined that 6.25% is not appropriate for this type of property, and no market participants would look at this property and apply a 6.25% cap rate to it. Only the assessment and taxation department has looked at it and applied a 6.25% cap rate. Mind you, they do have something of an impossible mission, having to value every single property in the city. So that's where we come in, and we look at these properties and we make our determination based on relevant market data. Moving on to page 9 of my disclosure. Again, it's worth pointing out that between April 1st, 2021, the last reference period, and April 1st, 2023, the current reference period, the economy in Canada went through some very drastic changes as it pertains to interest rates. As you can see in the page 9 on this table here, on this graph, we had significant interest rate increases. And it's quite strange looking at this property. On the previous assessment cycle, the city had applied a capitalization rate of 6.5%. So April 1st, 2021, the city used a 6.5% capitalization rate in valuing the property. Come April 1st, 2023, the city has decreased the capitalization rate to 6.25% during a time period in which interest rates increased rapidly and significantly. And yet the city's analysis of the market, for whatever reason, they've decided to lower the capitalization rate. So in a time where interest rates are going up, the city has reduced the capitalization rate for the property, which is totally out of line with the reality of the market.
Mr. Chair, is it appropriate to compare assessments from previous
Well-
cycles?
I'm not comparing assessments. I'm talking about different cycles.
I think he's commenting. I think that's fine, Mr.
Okay.
Pannella.
Just checking. Thanks.
Please proceed, Mr. Hirschborough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, just to summarize what I was saying before I was interrupted, again, the change in capitalization rate is out of line with the reality of the market. Moving on to page 10, MNP has analyzed the sales of 5 different strip malls. And what we've determined is that capitalization rates typically are in the 7 to 9% range for strip malls. This falls in line with the research that was done by third-party commercial real estate firms. So we've looked at what market rents were during the sale period. So if we're looking at 794 Sargent, 2979 Pembina, 5114 Roblin, 1039 McPhillips, and 3042 Portage. If you look at the leasable area, the properties are all comparable in terms of their size. When you're looking at the subject property, all similar in size. Of course, when you're looking at different types of commercial real estate, they don't sell as often as a house would. So we weren't able to look at properties that sold on April 1st, 2023. We are looking at sales that are a little bit older, but we have applied market rents that are appropriate for the subject for these types of properties, analyzed what the vacancy would have been during those different periods, and then we're able to determine what the capitalization rate would have been when these properties sold. So if in the appendix of the report, I have referenced the City of Winnipeg assessment guide for the sale periods of the comparable sales, and looking at what was used as expense allowance and what was used as the vacancy allowance during that time. So looking at these sales of properties that are very similar to the subject, the 6.25 cap rate, again, is not supported by market evidence of comparable sales, and it's not supported by market evidence as researched by third parties. So again, on page 11, we're asking for a 7.25 cap rate. That cap rate is supported by third parties, and it's supported by our research of comparable sales. And again, speaking to the very difficult mission that the Assessment and Taxation Department has, it's of course impossible for them to review every single property in Winnipeg in full detail. They do have, of course, the income and expense questionnaire that was provided by the owner of the property. MNP has analyzed those financial statements, and on page 12, we determined that the non-recoverable expenses for the subject property amounted to 14.87% of the potential income. a total of $28,773. It should also be noted, and the assessor wouldn't have noticed this unless he read through the financial statements in detail. And again, I don't expect the assessment department to read through these financial statements and analyze every line item for every property in Winnipeg. So it would have been very difficult for the assessor to notice this, but the subject property, in addition to the expenses they have with operating the property, they also lease a part of the adjacent hydro corridor, and that's a non-recoverable expense of $4,337.67. It's a gravel parking lot that provides tenants, employees, customers with additional parking. And if we go back to page 6, the assessment map, we can see that small strip just below the property that's being leased. So it's a bit hard to see, but it is just right next to the property, just that small strip along the hydro corridor line. And if I can bring the board's attention back to page 12, we'll move on to page 13, where we have included the income and expense statement that was provided to the assessment and taxation department. And that shows how we were able to determine that the property is actually experiencing expenses that amount to 14.87% of their potential income. So I'll just give the board a moment if you want to look at that expense statement. And you will note the hydro land lease as well under other expenses. And then moving on to page 14, again, we've summarized the sales of similar sized strip malls in Winnipeg. The subject property has been assessed at $205 per square foot. We've requested an assessed value based on our determination of the market value of the property that is $153.20 per square foot, which is still higher than a lot of the comparable sales. And for the board's convenience, on page 15 and 16, I have included photos of the comparable strip malls. And then bringing the board's attention to page 17. Again, MNP has analyzed relevant market data, the subject property's expenses. We've determined that the expenses amount to 14.87%, as well as we have determined that an appropriate cap rate for the property is 7.25%. And respectfully, I would like to ask the board to revise the assessed value to reflect the fair market value for the subject property. And with that, I would welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Fontanilla?
Yes, I do have a few questions. Mr. Horsborough, if we can go back to page 10, I believe, of your brief, it's the comparable sales table that you have for us for your cap rate analysis.
Yeah.
So how did you deduce those market rates that you have applied there? I see that you have $6.50 for Sargent, $11 for Pembina, $11 for Roblin, etc. Can you just walk us through how you applied those rates?
Yeah, certainly. So we were able to look at old availability reports that we had in our database. So we were looking at, so for Sargent, we were able to look at asking rents in the West End. For Pembina, we were able to look at what the asking rents were in 2017. For like south by the U of M, what the asking rents were for strip malls, and the same for all those other properties. We were able to look at availability reports that are posted, monthly by CBRE, Colliers, whomever, and we have those. And so we were able to look at that and deduce what a reasonable market rent would be for the property.
Okay, thanks for that. And then moving forward to your expense analysis, let's have a discussion about that. So what is the expense for the hydrolod? The expense for the hydrolod, I did notice that, by the way, but on the line that you have here, do you consider that hydro land lease to be a non-recoverable expense?
We do consider that to be a non-recoverable expense, yeah.
Okay, and have you done a 3-year analysis of the subject property's expenses to deduce if there is an increase above and beyond what the average would be?
Yeah, we have the property's financial statements. We've reviewed them, and we've determined that that your analysis of the expenses are out of line with the reality for the property.
Okay, and are you aware that the subject property recovers their CAM and property tax expense?
I'm aware of a lot of the recoverable expenses, but like most properties, they can't recover everything, and they don't recover everything.
Okay. And looking through your expense table, it was difficult to determine exactly where you guys got your 14.87%. Are you able to actually walk me through the math of how you came out to that 14.87%?
Well, certainly. So if you look at the expense allowance, $28,773.
Where does that expense allowance coming from? Where is that 28,773?
So we're looking at a number of different items. Give me a second here.
Sure.
So, I mean, we're looking at a number of these expenses. So we have the common area recovery noted on page 13 of my disclosure. We have the tax recovery, we have the sign revenue recovery, we have the previous, well, we have that, it's not really relevant, but the previous CAM costs. So in deducting those recoveries from the actual total operating expenses, we were able to come to that $28,000 figure. But I'm not going to break out my calculator and go through every single one.
Okay, and just one last question. It's curious. I noticed that your income statement, your expense statement, was this statement provided to you by the owner by any chance, or?
Are you referencing page 13?
Yes, page 13 of your brief.
Yes, this would have been provided by the owner.
By the owner, okay. Okay, thanks. No further questions.
Any questions, Ms. McFadden?
I think my questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. So just looking at your sales comparables, like you said, it was difficult to find more current ones because most of these are at least 7 years old. But But I noticed the 1956 property has a cap rate in your comparable of 7.29, and the subject property is in 1987, so it's 30 years newer. So with your suggested cap rate of 7.25, I recognize it takes into more account than just the age. What would constitute the 7.25 in light of the 1956 to the 1987 30-year difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in analyzing the 1039 McPhelps property, it has been renovated over the years, and those renovations have brought the property in line with the 1987 property. So, like most of our strip malls in Winnipeg that are from the 50s, over the years they've been renovated in order to retain tenants, attract new tenants. So, a 1956 strip mall has undergone the renovations that don't bring it in line with the market for, say, a brand new strip mall, but the renovations do bring it in line with a strip mall from the 1980s.
Okay. And then my other question is in regards to the comparable sales, the expense rate in there is noted as 3%, which is consistent with the city's model, yet the subject properties at 14.87%. So just because they're your comparables from a perspective of expense rates, there's a fairly big gap between those numbers.
Yeah, and so unfortunately, I wasn't able to analyze what the actual expenses were for the comparable properties. So I'm looking at a general overview. So I've taken what the city's model rate is for an expense rate, and generally I find that the city's expense rates are fairly accurate, but for certain properties they just aren't able to. They don't have the manpower to read through every expense item, and that's really why I'm here, to make sure that the properties that I represent are fairly assessed. And I've looked through the expense items for the subject property. If I had those financials available to me where I was able to look at the expenses for each property line by line, it may vary from that 3%. But for a general overview, I was comfortable with taking the 3% from the city and applying it to these comparable sales.
Okay, thank you. And then I think my last question is, there's just the one E&I. I'm just wondering, did you do any type of analysis as far as stabilization over the last few years, or is it just the one that's there?
I've just included the one in my disclosure. I did review the previous ones. The property has had some fluctuations in terms of their income and expenses. They did lose a major tenant a few years ago, and so that impacted their income, and it impacted their recoverable expenses. So looking at the property, I did stabilize. I didn't include the stabilized numbers. I don't recall off the top of my head what they were, but we have seen some fluctuations in their expenses as they've had a lot of turnover in recent years with their tenants.
Okay, so with those longer leases, those are not accurate? The current longer leases, the 30+ year leases on the subject?
Those are still in place. Yeah. The ones that were in the assessor's brief, as far as I'm aware, those are still in place. And then they have one or two newer leases. They've got a 2018 lease and a 2019 lease.
Okay. That's it for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, I've got a few questions. I guess the first one is, which long-term tenant did they lose?
They lost a Assiniboine credit union.
Okay.
And I'm actually gonna speak to that in my rebuttal as well, because I do think it's worth discussing.
Okay, we can let you do that in your rebuttal. I'm looking at your page number 10, and you indicated, for example, you were really aware of the expense ratio, so you just plugged in 3% everywhere. And I don't see a sale price anywhere in these, so I'm just wondering how you arrived at your cap rates.
Okay, so
Okay.
the estimated
Not
market
real
value-
cap rates, they're basically, if I'm looking at your information, are they not just using the numbers you put in, that's the cap rates you derive, but
So sorry, I should have added another line to that table. So the estimated market value, that is what the property sold for. So I've worked backwards from the sale price to determine what the cap rate would have been. So that estimated market value, that capitalized value, those were the actual sale prices. And I should have noted that. So that's a good question.
and why was the market rent on Sargent Avenue only $6.50 a foot?
So looking at that part of Sargent, and we looked at the asking rents from 2017, and we were seeing a lot of rents in the $6 to $7 a square foot range, just given the neighborhood. It seemed that strip malls in that area were having a difficult time retaining tenants and attracting good tenants. And I was kind of surprised at how low the rents were there, but I think it's just a factor of that West End neighborhood and that part of Sargent in particular.
Okay, but the $6.50 is not then reflective of what that property exact was producing. It's what the area was doing.
It was reflective of what asking rents were, what market rents were for retail properties in that area at that time period.
And I recognize that little strip mall because I've driven by it many times, and I would say that it's a much nicer strip mall than anything else in the area.
Oh, I'm glad if it's improved or
No,
hopefully.
I look at your photographs, so I recognize it. Would you?
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not sure what you're comparing it with, but I know other properties in the area are older and dowdier.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Certainly, 794. It might have been achieving higher rents,
Yeah.
but again, I wasn't able to determine what rents were being achieved there. So I looked at what market rents were for the area. But I would agree with you that that is one of the nicer strip malls in the area. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think they lease to a number of office type properties as well. I think there's an MLA that leases space there.
Yeah.
So as far as that part of town goes, I would agree with you. That probably is one of the nicer strip malls in the area, and that rental rate probably would have been higher. So you could give less weight to that comparable, and I would agree with you there that they probably would have been achieving higher rents than that 650 mark. But unfortunately, I just went off of the information I had available to me as to market rents in the neighborhood.
Okay, so your sales all took place in 2016 and 2017 at the same date as actually the subject property sold for $3 million. So how do you reflect that?
Yeah, so the properties are bought and sold with the leased fee interest. So the subject property, when it sold in 2017 for $3 million, it included a large above market lease. So when the property sold, the person buying it is buying it with the leases in place. After they've lost the Assiniboine Credit Union as a tenant, the rental rates come down, the income comes down, and then looking at the property as to what it's worth on April 1st, 2023, anyone who'd be purchasing it would be looking at the leased fee interest, and they would be looking at the income it generates as of April 1st, 2023, and they wouldn't be able to justify a $3 million price or a $2.8 million price based on the income it's producing.
Okay, so when it was purchased, and reflected to that was the Assiniboine Credit Union lease coming to termination?
It came to termination, I believe, in 2019.
And the purchaser was aware that that lease was expiring in 2019?
And my understanding is that they were expecting to re-sign. However, during that time, Assiniboine Credit Union, they kind of started closing a lot of their strip mall branches. And, as you drive through town, you see Assiniboine Credit Union has grown a lot, and they tend to now own most of their buildings. So yeah, unfortunately, they were hoping that they would be able to continue renting that space, and that did not happen.
Okay, now we're getting back to your table again, though. So you plugged in 3%, you plugged in market rents that you say are from the area, but not necessarily reflective of the property. So how can you really arrive at, when you say you have arrived at cap rates, how can those cap rates be real? We don't know what the property was producing. We don't know what it sold for. we don't know what, you're basically using data that you plug in and then you derive a cap rate.
Yeah, so they're estimated cap rates. They're estimated cap rates. It's the best guess that any sort of appraiser could do, unless they have that raw data available to them. So looking at the market rents, looking at what the city has determined to be an appropriate vacancy rate, appropriate expense rate, we were able to derive those cap rates. But of course, they are estimated cap rates, and they fall in line with what third parties have determined.
Okay, and well, some of them are higher. And they do go back to data that would be available in 2017, 2016, which is not reflective of today when you say cap rates have actually, you say they've gone up. Because
interest rates that have gone up.
Yeah.
And I would expect cap rates to also increase as those interest rates increase.
Okay. And why would this, you're saying that you've gone through a lot of data and you showed that the 3% expense ratio that the model produces for these type of properties is reasonable, but you are insinuating or saying that the subject property has a 14.87% expense ratio, and you're not really showing it.
Sorry?
I think I would really like to see, if you're claiming that you should show from your expense statement how you've come to that, because I'm not sure what's in there. So I have difficulty with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, okay, that's just a comment. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you very much. You can you indicate you have some rebuttal.
That's correct.
Okay, I guess we should see your rebuttal then.
Now, do all the panel members have access to that rebuttal?
And that's
Is it-
demonstrated, yes.
Is it on the SharePoint?
Yes, it is.
What's it entitled?
It should be under item 1. It'll say item 1, 24,464, 844 McLeod Avenue, applicant rebuttal.
Okay, Phoebe, I'm not seeing it on mine.
Yeah, I don't see it on mine either.
No, me neither.
In there on my folder here. Did you try refreshing?
I just,
Okay, I'll refresh.
I have it now after refreshing.
Yep, I have it now as well. Thank you.
Yes, I have it as well.
Okay, and so Mr. Diamond, I guess just if you don't mind, just to your point as to the expenses, you're right. I should have included, I guess, my sort of breakdown. But if you'll allow me, I'll just quickly, if we look at page 13, I can point the board to really 3 items, 3 quick calculations, and we can see how we arrive at that expense of 28,000. So if you allow me to do that,
Go back to your page 13, Mr.
Yes. And then it should be crystal clear.
Okay, I'm there. I'm not sure if everybody else is.
Okay, so if everyone's there, just very quickly, we'll look at the line item total operating costs under the column year-to-date actual. And we have 106,473. So now if we take that as the total operating costs, and you can punch it into your calculator. I'm punching it into my calculator. And so we take that number, and then now under the line item common area recovery, we can deduct 34,578, and then we can deduct the tax recovery 44,358, and then we can deduct sign revenue 1,200, and then add back previous year's CAM costs, and then that takes us to the 28,000.
Okay.
So I hope that makes sense. So thank you for allowing me to do that. But you know, that is a very good point. And going forward, it's a good piece of advice actually. So I should, in future disclosures, I'll do my best to include that breakdown with the expense statement, just to make things a little bit more clear. So that's a very good comment, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I'll carry on to my rebuttal. I'll give the board a moment to reopen that. I apologize for making everyone flip back and forth. I'll just have a sip of water.
Okay, we're on your rebuttal right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So before I start with the rebuttal, I apologize. I had a couple of templating issues with it. So page 5 of my rebuttal, I would just ask the board to ignore that page. It was a templating error there. But starting on page 3 of the rebuttal, again, bit of a templating error here. We have a large blank space. But there are really just a couple of points that I want to make with my rebuttal. The assessor included the 2017 sale price of the subject property. The property was purchased with the leased fee interest, and they paid the price they did because they were getting the property with the existing leases, including the Assiniboine Credit Union lease, which was a long-term lease that they expected to have renewed. And when they, my understanding, talking to the owner, they expected the property or the tenant to renew the lease. Management changes at Assiniboine Credit Union resulted in them on a mass level moving away from leasing and instead moving into owner-occupied properties. The second point I want to make is that the city is obligated to defend the assessment. The onus is on the assessor to prove that the value is correct, and the assessor has pointed to a lot of market rent comparables that aren't similar to the subject property. So I'll move on to page 4 of my rebuttal here. So I guess I already said this, but the property was purchased with the leased fee interest and with a tenant that was paying an above market rent. I have included evidence to that. Again, the assessor has relied on rent comparables primarily from a renovated strip mall on Leela. Again, we're not disputing the assessed income, but I did feel it was worth noting that. And as well, the assessor did include an excerpt from the Municipal Assessment Act. So I did feel it was worthwhile pointing out section 53-1 of the Municipal Assessment Act. Again, the burden of proof is placed on the assessor to determine that the assessed value is correct. And I believe, though the assessor does have, the assessment department does have something of an impossible job with this property, the assessor has not provided compelling evidence in support of his determination of the cap rate and the assessed value in general. So with that, I'd like to bring the board's attention to page 6 of the disclosure. Again, not the best photo, but you should be able to make out that July 2017, the property did have a large tenant, Assiniboine Credit Union. And now they have a cannabis store and paraphernalia shop there. So from a landlord's perspective, and from I would think most market participants, be far better to have a credit union occupying a large amount of space as opposed to a cannabis store. So we can see the difference between in the strip mall from this photo. And then on page 7, the Assiniboine Credit Union was leasing a large amount of space in the property. They would have attracted more people to the strip mall than a cannabis store. As we saw in the assessor's disclosure, most of the leases in the subject property range from $11 to $15 a square foot. Assiniboine Credit Union was paying $19 per square foot at the time when the property was purchased. So in losing that tenant, they also lost what was one of their highest rents. And again, having that high rent, that's what drove the purchase price, the above market rents. And then just briefly speaking to the assessor's rent comparables, here we have the 644 Lila property, and we can see that it has been renovated, whereas the subject property has not been renovated. And then on pages 9, 10, and on pages 9 and 10, I have included just the permits relating to the subject property and to the comparable rent property, 644 Lila. And then finally, on page 11, I've just included that Municipal Assessment Act excerpt. Just again, reiterating that the burden of proof is on the assessor to prove the value is correct. And with that, I welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Putnell. Any questions on the rebuttal?
No, I believe I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, any questions on the rebuttal?
Just to clarify, so in your assessment, the city comparables are not adequate comparables or good comparables, primarily because the ones chosen by the city were not renovated properties. Was there any other reason why you felt the city comparables were not good comparables?
The only other issue I have with it is that they're in 2 different neighborhoods. So we have the subject property on McLeod Avenue, and I guess adjacent to Elmwood, or East Kildonan, I guess you would put it in. And then the Layla property, where the majority of the rent comparables are based on that Layla property, it's more in Garden City. So they are in 2 different markets. But of course, a renovated property is going to be more attractive to tenants as opposed to a property that hasn't been substantially renovated since the 1980s. And of course, more attractive to customers as well. I think that is probably an important factor. A renovated property, you drive, like I drove past Lila, I say, oh, wow, it's been renovated. You notice the tenants a little bit more than a property that hasn't been renovated. It's less attractive to tenants and less attractive to customers.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Fadden, any questions?
Just to be clear, you're not disputing the rents that the city has put in place on that income side. That's not in dispute at all.
So in our evaluation of the subject property, we aren't disputing the rent that's used in the city's valuation. We've used that same income in our evaluation of the property.
Despite your concern about the comparables.
Despite my concern about the comparables.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So thank you both for your presentations. If there's any summation that either of you want to make, I'll let you do that now.
I'm okay, Mr. Chair, in a summation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Horsborough.
No desire for summation as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So that completes all matters on the docket today. We will be closing this hearing at this point, and you'll receive our decisions in short order. Thank you very much for your attendances and your evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Pontanilla. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel members as well.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye.